Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 6. Congratulations. You've made it to just about the third of the class-ish. You've gotten through test 1, so congrats on that. You've got pretty much the rhythm of how everything goes. I did mention in my reminder announcement on Sunday just to be keeping an eye out for the report that's going to be due, the concert report. And that used to be, obviously, either you went to a live concert or you went to the Grammy Museum. But since we can't do those now, I changed it over to a concert that you watch online. So I do want it to be a concert. I do want it to be like rock, pop, hip hop, country, whatever. I don't want classical. I don't want jazz. I did provide a link. If you go into that section, that takes you to a list of YouTube concerts. You can use those. You can also use other ones. That's just a starting point. But you're welcome to pick another concert. I would say make sure that you got a concert that's at least maybe a half an hour long. It's really just to be on one band or artist. So we don't really want an overview of a festival. I want you to really focus on that because there's a little bit of research involved, and then it's writing about the concert that you watched. If you have any questions, if you're not sure that something counts, then please reach out to me and let me know before you go in and do it. And you are allowed to turn that in early. So for those of you A-type personalities that just want that done and off your list, you are welcome to do that now and get it turned in. But of course, the due date's still coming a little bit down the line. So if it were me, I'd probably be thinking about knocking that out, especially with spring break coming up here pretty soon. I would be thinking about that. So that is that. And this week, you are going to be learning about the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And this is a huge change and game changer, particularly with the Beatles. And so I'm not going to do like the whole lecture because you've got the materials, but I do want to say a few things to sort of get you in the mindset. The Beatles and the Stones were very different bands. And I always describe the Stones as the greatest American band that happened to come from England. And you'll see that as you learn about their roots, that their roots are firmly grounded in American blues and rhythm and blues and country, and even Motown fits in there. And so that was very influential. They were very much drawing on American music, American culture. And when you listen to the music of the Rolling Stones, from here on out, try to listen to it with that lens. Make sure that you're listening to the playlist that I made for you. Hopefully some of you, if not all of you, are familiar with these bands, extremely important bands. But I have to say the Beatles, without a doubt, are the most important band in the history of rock. Now, Elvis, probably the most important individual in terms of the history of rock. You learned about Elvis, you learned about his impact musically and racially, and how he was able to bring all these things together in what he did in the 50s. And then he ended up opening the doors for a lot of people like Buddy Holly, Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, and he made a much bigger impact in terms of what they could have received with the black artists like Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, stuff like that. So, our folks like that. So Elvis, huge. Beatles, without a doubt, huge. Now, the Beatles, really, this is the first time that we're going to be getting out of the United States. All the way through now, we've been talking about this American style of music, and now you're going to learn about music in England. So you're going to learn a little bit about skiffle, which was a lot of English bands started off as skiffle groups. It was kind of an acoustic style of music that was based on American styles of music as well. But skiffle as such was not a big thing here. We had folk and we had other things. So you're going to see a lot of and hear about a lot of bands that start that way. And then, so the Beatles, the genesis of the Beatles, the Quarrymen, started off as a skiffle group, and then they started playing American rock and roll, and they were very much influenced by the rock and rollers. Elvis, Carl Perkins, Buddy Holly. In fact, the Beatles name, which, by the way, it's Beatles, not Beatles like the bug. It's actually a play on the word Beatles. Using the word beat, like as in a beat of music or the Beat Poets or whatever. And so they were really firmly grounded in American rock and roll. The Beatles name comes from Buddy Holly and the Crickets. They sort of went with the bug kind of theme off of that. And as you learned in the 50s and on, it's very common when you start to see a lot of bands, they'll have a lot of similar names, whatever they're drawing of. And you'll see these periods where you'll notice with certain bands that the is the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, the Kinks. Then that kind of drops away for a while. Then it comes back, and it happened in the 80s. And that goes in and out. The other thing that goes out is that idea of there was a whole bunch of bands for a while that were had animals in the names, trying to Cage the Elephant, Grizzly Bear, Tame Impala, all these things that you sort of get in these themes. So other things to pay attention to. So the Beatles were very much grounded in American rock and roll, and they started playing. And the thing that's important about the Beatles, well, there's a lot of them. And I just want you, as you're going through the reading, to really pay attention to this really kind of almost miraculous set of circumstances. These guys met in Liverpool. Paul McCartney and John Lennon met at a village fete, F-E-T-E, which it describes in the book. And a fete was just like a carnival. So if you've ever gone to like a school carnival, that's really what that was. And then they started playing, and they went from the Quarrymen, and then they ended up becoming the Silver Beatles, and then eventually the Beatles. And then they started working in Hamburg, Germany, and they played in these clubs, and they would play for 4, 5, 6 hours a night, doing primarily cover songs. So they got to be really, really good at what they do. If you're familiar with the concept of 10,000 hours to become an expert in something, they had that in spades. And so they became huge. They ended up going back to Liverpool, which was this really kind of working class town. They ended up getting a manager with Brian Epstein. And he ended up helping them to get signed. And I'm just giving you this sort of Reader's Digest version of this. I don't even know how many of you know what that means, but the short version, but make sure that you go through the materials in the book and online. And then they get signed, and then, they put singles out, and they're out. The Beatles really form as the Beatles, as we know them, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, in 1962. They didn't really break until 1964 over here, even though there was a little bit of energy and interest behind them. And that's what we call the British invasion, was in 1964. So the British invasion was profound because the Beatles making it over here, no English artist had really made it here in the United States before. So when the Beatles broke, then all of a sudden the doors opened wide for English bands, particularly the Rolling Stones and the Who and the Kinks and the Animals and all sorts of folks that were able to get through and become big here. So had the Beatles not done what they did, we might not have ever known about the Stones and the Who and the Kinks and all that sort of stuff. The other thing was that the Beatles started writing their own songs. Buddy Holly did that as well. Some of them did that. But the Beatles eventually took on to where they wrote their music. And now, mind you, with pop music back in these days, it was very common that you had songwriters, which would be a composer and a lyricist, and then you had a band. I realize I'm doing things with my hands and you can't see my hands down here, but if you see my shoulders moving, that's what I'm doing. Anyways, so what happened was, if you were a songwriter, you would then find a band that you would put together to play your music. So for example, at Motown, you had Berry Gordy writing songs, and you had Smokey Robinson, and you have Dozier, Holland Dozier, and they're writing these songs, and then they would give it to artists to perform. What you have with the Beatles was a band that not only wrote their own songs, they played their own songs and recorded their own songs. That was groundbreaking. We don't think anything about that nowadays. You'd think, well, of course, a band would write their songs and then record them. The Beatles changed all that. The Beatles and Bob Dylan. And those are two profound game changers. The other thing that happened when the Beatles started off was that, they were writing a lot of love songs and things like that. 1964, they end up meeting Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan basically says to them, look, why aren't you writing songs with substance, songs about things? And Dylan changed the way that the Beatles wrote music and the songs that they wrote about using rock instruments, which then the Beatles influenced Dylan, who went electric in 1965, and those kind of things happened. Also, the Beatles started to move from just writing songs, records. Remember, we've talked about that with 45s, and they started to think about albums and not just releasing singles first. This is like in the mid 60s. very much influenced by the Beach Boys. So the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds was a profound game changer in pop music. I know I'm saying profound a lot, but in this period with these artists, it fits. Because it changed the way the Beatles made music. And there was kind of a friendly rivalry between the Beach Boys and the Beatles, and they ended up becoming friends. But as Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys would push the envelope, then the Beatles would take it. So the Beach Boys heard Rubber Soul, and Brian Wilson was like, we got to do something more than that. And they do Pet Sounds. And then the Beatles hear Pet Sounds, which happens to be Paul McCartney's favorite album. And then the Beatles go, well, we got to like push the envelope. And that's where Sgt. Pepper's comes from. So you have all of these things happening, and you have these massive stylistic changes from the Beatles over the course of just 7 years. So the Beatles were only active from 62 to 1969. They had one album come out in 1970, but that stuff had already been recorded with Let It Be. And you'll learn about that. So the Beatles changed everything about pop music. And there's this really great book. I know I recommended a book last week. If you're a Beatles fan or you're just sort of interested in that whole thing, there's this really amazing book called How the Beatles Destroyed Rock and Roll. And I got this book at first, and I was like, all right, this is going to be some big hate on the Beatles thing. But it's not. It actually explains how the Beatles changed rock and roll from teen-centered music about, dancing and love songs and music to make out by and all that good stuff to music to actually sit down and listen to like you would more like classical music. So it becomes more of a sophisticated listening environment. So by the time you get to Sgt. Pepper's and the White Album and Abbey Road and all of that, it changes the way that you hear the music. Okay? So you're going to learn all about the Beatles. That's my little, sort of encapsulation of what you're going to learn, but it's going to get into the details. Pay attention to all those things as you read through it and watch. Now, the Stones were a totally different animal, if you will, musically. And so sometimes you hear people talk about, well, who was better, the Beatles or the Stones? It's not even fair to compare them because they are so different in what they do. The Beatles started off more as like a pop band, working band, with their roots in American rock and roll. And by the way, sometimes people will refer to the Beatles as a boy band. The Beatles were not ever a boy band. They were a band that had 4 young men in them, but they were not. They were never a boy band. So a boy band, if you don't know, is basically a band that's been prefabricated by somebody. So if you have these auditions and you put things together. So most all of the boy bands that you would think of, Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and BTS and what's the one that Harry Styles was in? Why am I blanking on that all of a sudden? But those were bands where they auditioned. And then in their case, Simon Cowell put them together. But so they're really fabricated bands. They generally don't write their own stuff. They're very well rehearsed, choreographed, all that. The Beatles did it all. Wrote, played, they formed organically. Same thing with the Stones. They formed organically. Keith Richards and Mick Jagger ended up going to school together when they were young, separated, and ended up running into, famous story, they ran into each other at a train station. Keith Richards had a bunch of blues records in his hands. They started talking about the blues, and then they formed the band. So, and I want you also to pay attention to these bands and the differences. Beatles had 4, the Rolling Stones had 5. So you have Keith, Mick, Brian Epstein, Bill Wyman, and Charlie Watts. The Beatles very much grounded in rock and roll. The Stones very much grounded in the blues and rhythm and blues. So very different, not fair to compare. It's not even apples and oranges. It's like apples and steak or something. It doesn't even make sense. So that is that. So now we're going to kind of roll into it this week and next week. I think you just have one chapter, maybe for the next few weeks. So that's good. A little easier. Take it easy. But take the time. Please read the comments that I'm writing for you. Sometimes I'll just put, hey, good job, great job, whatever. I want you to know you're doing a good job, great job. Sometimes I'll put things like, please don't forget to post the topic at the top of your reflection observation. Or I'll put in a few things about you missed this or you could have got that. I want you to do better. And that means taking some time. And so let me help you. If you're not sure what I mean, reach out. But I want you to really do a great job on these. Okay, so for the reply to this video, I'm going to make it a double thing. It's easy though. 1, what was the book that I just showed you, since I did a book thing last time. What was the book that I just showed you? And what was it called? And who wrote it, if you want to put that in there too. And then also, if you're reading my comments, please let me know. Just say, hey, I'm reading your comments, or I haven't been reading your comments, but I will now. And there's a way you can go in the inbox in Canvas, and you can, instead of unread, you can change it to say submission comments, and that way you can read if I'm writing anything. I comment to every assignment, even if it's just to encourage or whatever. So that's it. I know this was a little bit longer video than normal. I try not to go this long, but this lesson really changes the landscape. You probably wouldn't be listening to the music you're listening to today if it wasn't for the Beatles in one way or another. And even if you're sitting there going, well, I only listen to hip hop, what the Beatles did with sound and soundscapes with the producer George Martin and Musique Concrète influences that too. So the influence is profound. That's it. Have a wonderful week. I know we got some rain coming again, but enjoy, stay safe, stay healthy. And I know it's been a year since this whole thing started. It's kind of unbelievable that it's been that way. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. So hang in there and keep powering on. And in the words of Bob Dylan, keep pressing on. All right. Take good care. Bye.